Have you ever been angry at God? If so, you are not alone. There are many reasons why we as human beings get upset with God. Perhaps it was unmet expectations, unfavorable circumstances outside of your control, or the loss of a friend or family member. Whatever the reason, we were or are angry with God. However, staying angry doesn't bring peace or reconciliation. In fact, not moving past the phase of being angry can cause us to remain stuck in a phase that could result in further dissatisfaction in life. In this episode, I talk about my most recent experience in being angry with God and what I need to do to move past it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kingdom Truth and Power podcast. This is your host, Terrence Lockett, and in today's episode, I want to talk about this subject or topic of being angry with God. I know it sounds somewhat taboo to say because we don't really like talking about our feelings, specifically negative feelings towards God, or even talking about being angry or upset with God, disappointed, frustrated, you name it. But if we're going to be real, with ourselves and real with God, I think it's something that we need to be, somewhat transparent about because it is a reality. God created us as human beings, which means that we have, we have this physical body, and within this body, we have a soul and a spirit. And it's our soul that is comprised of our will, our mind, and our emotions. And when we face certain, situations in life, they tend to play on that emotional part of our being. And certain situations, circumstances, what have you, experiences, they can have, a negative impact on our emotions. And so, certain things that happen to us, we become angry or we become frustrated, upset, what have you. And in the process of experiencing those emotions, oftentimes we look to someone where we can point the finger or blame as either the root or a partial cause of whatever it is that we're experiencing that is affecting us negatively. And even in the kingdom, there are times that we become somewhat frustrated with God, or we become upset with him. And I really believe that part of it, if not maybe all of it, really has to do with our perspective. Because we don't know the whole picture. We don't know, and we don't see things the way that God sees them, and the purpose in which he may have behind allowing certain things to happen, or even bringing certain things our way. And so with our limited peripheral, we don't necessarily understand why in the moment. And so when certain things that we just don't like, that we experience happens to us, we feel what we feel. And that's the human side of us, right? We feel what we feel, and we should be open and honest with what we feel, because that's what makes a relationship, is being able to express to another person what it is that you're feeling, why you're feeling this way, and then working out some kind of compromise or agreement, to move past it, so that each side understands the other person better and can try to avoid, future, problems or issues, for lack of a better term, in order to help the other person not experience those feelings again. And I'm speaking here from a human perspective, but even with God, God understands and he knows why we're upset, what is making us angry. And he even, believe it or not, he knows when we're angry at him. And I think for a lot of us, we have a hard time acknowledging that we're really upset with God because we don't want to come off as being angry with God, and we try to brush it off, or we try to downplay it, or even downright deny that we're having these feelings towards God because we don't want God to think that we're angry with him, maybe in fear that God would in turn become angry with us. But the thing that I have learned is that God is big enough and he is mature enough to handle when we express our our anger, or our frustrations, disappointments, things like that to him, where he doesn't become offended, or he isn't surprised or caught off guard by something that is bothering us. Now, that's not to say that we approach God in a disrespectful, dishonorable way, but that we just come to him open and honest about how we're feeling, what we're feeling, and what process we need to go through in order to move past that. And so, if you are feeling or have felt in any kind of way, any kind of anger, or you know, displeasure, resentment, or anything like that towards God, I want you to know that you are not alone and you're not the only one. There's been plenty of people throughout history, both in scripture as well as, outside of scripture, that have, had experiences that was just, displeasurable, and they felt a certain way towards God. But I'm pretty sure that God has gotten them to a place to where, they understood where things stood at that time, and God has worked in them and went through a process with them to help bring some kind of understanding as to where God, was in the situation and what that person had to do to get through it. Now, for me, I understand what it is that I have to do, and I'll share that a little later. But it's going to be a process. And I tried to start that process yesterday, and I had to be honest with myself and with God when I was talking to him that, I'm just having a hard time with this. And so, when we talk about being angry with God, like I said, there's been people in scripture, two people come to mind, one being Moses and the other being Jonah. In Numbers chapter 11, verses 10 through 15, Moses is getting to a place to where I'm sure he's becoming weary and worn down, agitated, irritated, frustrated, angry, upset, mad, not only with the people of, with the Israelites, but also with God, because here he is a man who was given a huge burden of leading slaves out of the land of Egypt into a land that God had promised to them and their fathers before them, namely Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here is Moses, a single man responsible for millions of people, and they're coming to him with different requests, crying out to him when they're hungry and when they're thirsting, and and blaming him for certain things, and saying, why did you lead us out of Egypt into this land, or into this wilderness, that you brought us out here to die in, and things like that. And so I can picture and maybe even imagine just how much of that weighed on Moses, not only physically and mentally, but also spiritually and even emotionally. And he's at a place where he's like, God, you gave me this burden. You put this on, this on me, and you put all these people in my care. You know, who am did I give birth to them? Did I conceive them? Moses is like, this is a situation that I had absolutely nothing to do with. You know, I didn't give birth to 12 children who then gave birth to all these people. And, that had nothing to do with me. But it's a burden that you have given me. And I'm basically fed up because it's too much of a burden to bear. And so when I think about that situation, I even think about the experience that I just had here recently, and recently being really yesterday. But I can imagine Moses just in this place where he's just getting almost to the point to where the what is it, the straw is about to break the camel's back. So I can definitely understand how Moses, well, I don't want to say understand, but I can kind of get it, how he could possibly be feeling. Now I think Jonah is a little different of a situation. Still angry with God, but his anger towards God and his frustration was based on God's mercy towards a nation that was known to be enemies of Israel. But nonetheless, he expressed his displeasure and his anger with God because of his mercy towards these people, the people of Nineveh, and God had a dialogue with him. Now, unfortunately, the book of Jonah ends really in the middle of a conversation, and it would be very interesting to know how that particular dialogue ended. But you know, I think the lesson, at least what I take out of it, when I consider that story, is that although Jonah in the beginning being disobedient, trying to run away from what God called him to do, he was still able to, share with God how he felt, and God was still big enough to hear Jonah out and not get angry with Jonah, but in the process teach him a lesson with words, and really with a real life parable with the plant that grew up and gave Jonah shade, and then God calling a worm to eat away at the plant, and then sending an east wind to blow the scorching heat on Jonah's head. And so there was a lesson in that. But like I said, it would be very interesting to see how that particular conversation ended. And so for me, in the situation that I've been dealing with really since yesterday, is this. Last month, I had signed up for a prophetic workshop that I had to, that I paid for and everything, and it was actually this weekend. Began last evening. There was basically a service that was happening that I wanted to attend to kind of kick things off, and then it continued today, Saturday, April 16th, from 10 in the morning till 5:30 in the evening. Now, unfortunately, I was unable to attend, even though I had bought my, paid for it, had my ticket and everything like that, but I was unable to attend. The reason I was unable to attend was that of all weekends and days or whatever that this could happen, it happened on this weekend where my car began to overheat, or at least I thought it was going to overheat, because the coolant gauge kept, the needle kept going between the midway point and hot. And so I didn't know why it was happening, what was going on. I had just recently had an oil change, and trusted that the mechanics did their courtesy checks and checked the fluid levels and things like that. So I really didn't think too much of it, and other than that there was something else going on that was causing the car's temperature to be off. And so the ministry where I was going to attend this workshop was about like an hour away, and I didn't want to risk driving that far and then getting stranded on the freeway because the car was overheating and I was unable to unable to drive it anymore. And so I had to make the decision to not go last night and try to see if I could, maybe get it looked at the same day and whatnot. And so I kind of just like went different places and everything to try to figure out what was going on. Whoever has some an opening and whatnot. Now, let me back up a little bit. Before I actually made the decision not to go, I had stopped off at an advanced auto parts because I happened to check my coolant and noticed that the coolant reservoir was completely empty. Why my mechanic didn't tell me that the coolant was empty was beyond me. So I had no idea about this, but I just happened to check it and noticed that it was empty. So I stopped it off at Advanced Auto Parts and got some coolant, added some coolant in the reservoir, started up the car, and kind of drove it just a little bit to see what would happen. Well, lo and behold, this needle was still moving. So I made the decision, you know what, I'm not going to go. If I can get the car looked at the same day, which was yesterday, fine. If not, then I'm going to have to get it looked at as soon as possible. Now, I was telling my wife this, and she was like, well, I can just take her car so I can still attend the workshop, which ended today. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that because, with having 3 children, I feel like it's my responsibility to ensure that I protect my family in every way possible, which means leaving them home, that if I have to go somewhere, especially somewhere that's an hour away or whatever, and going to a workshop that's, or at least being away from home for over 8 hours, I need to make sure that they are in or that they have a vehicle that is dependable and reliable enough that if she had an emergency to where she had to put our kids in the car and go somewhere, they will be able to do so without any worry of whether or not the car is going to overheat or, stall on them or whatever the case may be. So I didn't feel comfortable doing that. And like I said, I wanted to make sure that, again, if I'm going to be going for any extended period of time, that they had, that they had something reliable to depend on. So yesterday, I really struggled with this because this was something that I had on my heart and was really looking forward to. And I guess for me, it was that moment of, the straw breaking the camel's back. Because on top of that, I was already dealing with some things with wanting to mentor, young adults. And I had reached out to the local YMCA because they have a mentorship program. And I didn't hear anything back from them, in which I think I emailed the executive director either like Monday or Tuesday of this week. And, I was off yesterday in preparation for going to this workshop. So I was hoping that if I got a response from them, I can meet with them Friday morning, talk about, getting into a mentorship, things like that. I had this workshop that I was going to. And so there was things that I was looking forward to. But none of it worked out. And you know, after the situation with the car and calling around and finding out, how much it was going to cost me, if something needed to be repaired that I would possibly suspected could be the issue, how much that was going to cost. So, putting all of these things on me and just the disappointment, I was just angry. I got upset. Got upset with my mechanic because they didn't tell me about the coolant issue or anything like that, and let me drive around with really no coolant in my engine or in the reservoir. And I got upset with God because I was like, God, this is, I wanted to try to do the mentorship thing to gain some experience with mentorship, mentoring, and, possibly even develop this prophetic spiritual gift that you've given me by going to this workshop, and learn more about it. And I'm just, trying to do some good things, or at least things that I feel like are opportunities, and nothing, couldn't go to anything. And so, I just I was upset with God, you know, um, at least inside, I sensed within me that there was just some anger towards God. Whether I said anything, out loud or whatever, I don't really recall, but I know how I was feeling on the inside. And so, um, I had to deal with that. I had to at least acknowledge it at first, and I still have to deal with this. And even in my conversation with God yesterday, as the day went on, I was just like, God, I said, um, I know I need to ask for your forgiveness, or I need to forgive you, or something. I forget how it was. Or at least, I know, I think I said, I think I need to apologize, but there is still a part, there's a part of me that just isn't there yet. And so, although I wanted to apologize because I didn't want to be mad at God, and I didn't want God to know that I was mad at him, even though he already knew. But I just couldn't pull myself to that because I didn't want it to come off as being, fictitious in a sense, where I'm only apologizing because I don't want God to think that I'm mad at him, and I don't want God to be upset with me or anything like that. And so, I'm just processing these things. And so today, I when I woke up, I knew that the workshop thing was going to be happening, and I wasn't going to go. Still disappointed, this morning, and I was still sad about that because like I said, I was really looking forward to it. It was something that was on my heart, to really do and experience, and it didn't happen. And so, the whole situation with my car, I ended up, because I didn't do it yesterday, but I remember watching a video of a guy replacing the thermostat valve for the engine, and a step that he had performed or whatever that I didn't do when I was filling up the coolant, and that was basically to add coolant into the radiator of the engine. And so when I did that, let the car run for a while, and even drove it around a couple of times, the needle hasn't moved. It stayed in the middle between the hot and the cold. So I feel like, I've gotten that situation, rectified or resolved, at least for now. Hoping that there's no leak or anything like that in it. But, in time, I'll know. And if there is a leak, if it does happen again, then I'll go ahead and get it fixed. So at least that part for right now made me feel better. But I know I still had to deal with this, emotional ride that I was on, and being angry with God. And so what I what I realized was that um, I I needed to go beyond apologizing to God, um, and go towards forgiving God. And when I say forgiving God, it's more than just saying, God, I forgive you. Because when we think about forgiveness, and I'm going to go into really what forgiveness is here at this point, but when we think about forgiveness, we tend to, at least I think that we tend to look at it from the lens of such and such offended me or they wronged me, and now I have to forgive them. I have to free myself so that they no longer have any power over me because of my refusal to forgive. And I think that's a part of it. But one thing that I learned about forgiveness is really that true forgiveness is actually releasing someone from your judgment. That's what forgiveness really is. It's releasing someone from your judgment. Think about it. In John chapter 8, the woman that was caught in adultery, the judgment for adultery in the Old Testament, in which they were still in because Jesus had not yet gone to the cross, they were still in the Old Testament, in which the law said judgment for adultery is to be stoned, is for that person to be stoned. But however, what did Jesus do? Jesus simply forgave her, meaning that he released her from the judgment and from his judgment, because God is in agreement with his word and with his law. And at that time, God's law was a man or a woman that was caught in adultery at the with the witness or testimony established by two or three persons were to be stoned to death. However, Jesus, being God in the flesh, forgave her and released her from judgment. So when we talk about forgiving God, we're basically, what at least what I'm talking about is we're releasing God from our judgment, our determination or our decision that we have made up in our mind against him. That's what I need to do. I need to forgive God, or I need to release him from my judgment, whatever it is that I think that he has done to wrong me, even though he has done no wrong. In my mind and in my judgment, that is in my discernment or decision, I felt like God wronged me, or because he didn't, I'm like, he could have told me, spoke to me, said something, or not allowed this to happen, things like that. Those are the things that were going through my mind. Like, God, why did you let this happen? I like Moses. I'm the innocent person here. I had no idea. It's not like I knew about this and didn't do anything about it. And then when this day came, the car starts acting up on me and now I can't go. It's not like I knew it. I had no idea, and I feel like it was of no fault of my own that this has happened, and I'm trying to do something that I feel like God is wanting me to do. And so I felt like God should have been able to, do something to prevent these things from happening. And so that was my judgment against him. But what I need to do to move past this is simply forgive him and release him from that judgment. Now, the process of forgiveness isn't always quick and easy, because as human beings, as I said earlier, we do need to feel what we feel in order to learn and grow and mature in the process, so that when situations like this come again, we can handle it and deal with it in a more mature manner, and maybe not say, or get angry with God, or say, God, why didn't you do this or that or the other, and throw the blame on God, or at least part of the blame on God. So this process that I have to go through, it, and in time, I'm sure that I will be able to fully release God from my own judgment against him, and be able to, be reconciled, and have that peace with him once again. Because again, God is perfect. He's faultless. He can do no wrong. And so for me, I understand that if God can do no wrong, then he's not the issue. I have to look at myself or the situation and reassess, why things happen the way they happen, or just say, what, it is what it is. I need to move forward and I need to move on, and not blame God for, these things that are happening. And so I may never know why God allowed it to happen or anything like that. But, I know I'll get over it. I'll get past it, and, I'll release and forgive God, for what I felt he could have done, but maybe did not. So, it is what it is. But I wanted to share this with you. And just again, if you're angry with God, and or if you were angry with God and you find yourself, constantly getting upset with him because of certain things or whatever, just remember this, and the solution is going to be really forgiveness. Not in the sense that God has offended or done something wrong to you or towards you, but really that God is faultless. He's perfect in all his ways, and he's good. But whatever judgment that we have rendered against God, we need to release him from that. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been inspiring in some way, and a burden lifted off of you. Because again, like I said, you're not the only one that has felt this way. There's many people that have, but God will help us through the process. So that's all I have for you in this episode. I pray that it was a blessing to you. Please share it. And I'd love to talk to you guys in the next episode. So this is Terrence with the Kingdom Truth and Power podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.